Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. So today on the show, I'm joined by Florin Tufan. Florin is the co-founder and CEO of Veridion, a leader in providing firmographics B2B intelligence. Florin was also honored by Forbes Romania on the 2020 30 Under 30 list, and will be joining me at the inaugural AOP Direct virtual event on June the 13th. Now, in advance of that, it's going to be our first ever event dedicated to sharing tactics and strategies around direct materials. In advance of that, Florin and I had the chance to connect. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
It's a pleasure to have you joining us today. And a question that I always ask at the start of each conversation, and I know that sometimes this is a little bit more relevant to some people than it is to other people, but it's still a good kind of jumping off point for getting to know a little bit more about you is, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Definitely the second one. Procurement found me.
So how did you find yourself in, well, let's actually go to, because I think that the story that we'll tell will connect us with procurement eventually. You've been involved in data for a long time. And in procurement, we've talked about data being a problem forever, for as long as I've been in the profession, which is far too long now, 20 plus years. Why do companies still find data accuracy being such a challenge?
Well, the simple answer would be because it's such a complex problem.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say even if you're God and you know everything at all times,
yep,
there will still be things that have a question mark depending on the perspective with which you look at things.
Mm-hmm.
So data quality, even defining quality, it's a hard problem. And from there, the entire road to being God and knowing everything at all times,
Yeah.
it's a very long journey. I had a very similar experience in my career. I started off in sales and marketing and then moved to product management. Whenever I'm a very analytical guy, so I would use data for everything, try to use data for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And data quality issues always surprised me. You never expect things to be perfect, but getting quality data was always a challenge. So it's something that I've known for a long time until I had the courage to tackle it.
Is it solvable? Is data quality solvable? At scale?
99% of it is solvable.
Yeah. So that leads us to you. So you talked about the fact that you then decided to try and tackle that problem. What was it that made you decide, you know what, I'm going to give everything up and jump off that cliff and start my own business? And I've been there and done that, so I certainly know how that feels, and tackle the problem of data quality.
I only made a small commitment at first, along with my co-founders. It was meant to be a weekend project. Try to build a POC in our spare time. We were bored at our jobs and wanted something different, something that we were curious about and wanted to see if it can be done. We wanted to play with modern AI and do a lot of data-related things. But in our minds, we were trying to play with it rather than build a business. I don't think it was ever meant to be a business.
So at what time then did you look and say, you know what, I think we've got something here, and turned it into a business that was originally Solidify and then more recently rebranded to Veridion?
The requests we were getting from potential clients were so much less sophisticated than what we were trying to do, that we couldn't believe that these companies have these problems and they're willing to pay to solve them.
And I guess that speaks to the challenge that all companies have in terms of the maturity of data and data accuracy.
Well, the the problem with data and data accuracy gets much worse the older the company is. So
Hmm.
and usually the bigger the company is, the older it is, and you'll always have legacy upon legacy upon legacy, independent of how much the technology moves forward. If it's 1999 and you're adopting Salesforce, as long as you used to keep your prospects in a notebook,
Hmm.
you'll have challenges for years to come just to mitigate the legacy.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you need constant. One of my team at Procurement talks a lot about data husbandry all the time. Around, you really need to be on top of it all the time and continuing to cleanse it, or else really, really quickly that data gets, or a subset of that data becomes obsolete really quickly. And once you have a subset of data that's obsolete, you then question whether you can trust any of it.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges that our clients have, and it's one of our biggest challenges in helping them mitigate that. How do you measure your own data quality, and then if you adopt different solutions of different, sometimes it's even as easy or as it should be as straightforward as I'm taking it from one system where I manage a process, and I just try to merge it or put it together with the data from a different system where I manage something just slightly different but related. And how do you measure when you're trying to put A and B together? How do you measure A? How do you measure B? And then how can you be confident that A plus B is better than at least one of them?
Mm-hmm.
um, that's it's one of the major challenges that we see companies have. And going back to the origins, is one of the things that we thought by today it should be really easy, right?
Yeah. And so you focus on firmographic data specifically. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what does that include?
Well, it started off as something really easy. The market started off as something really straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the beginning, it was just, and we're talking more than 100 years ago. It wasn't called firmographics, but
Right.
the concept was the same. It was just, it was the company version of asking for somebody's ID.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's say I'm a bank, somebody applies for a credit. Can I at first check that this company exists and that what they put on this paper is what the company really is? Is it incorporated there?
Yeah.
Is that the address? Do they do what they say they do? Can I trust this person that wants to access one of my services? And what that required was an incredibly complex solution of putting all the different databases that were on paper back then of different counties, different states, different
Mm-hmm.
regions, and put it all in one place and offer this centralized service to everybody that needs to at first check for the validity of getting access to a financial service. But then it soon made a lot of sense to adopt the same process in procurement.
Yeah.
Can I trust that this supplier is what? Because it's just a different way of doing or saying the same thing. And then it evolved because it turns out that this checkup, it by itself doesn't do that much. It de-risks something very obvious,
Mm-hmm.
but in reality, what businesses ended up doing was they used complex solutions to check this, but then build a lot of more rigorous processes around it. So, okay, I can make sure that this company exists, it's at this address, it's actually a farm,
Yeah.
but do they actually raise these kinds of animals? Have they been there 15 years? How big is it? What's the relationship with the neighbors and so on? And it ended up being completely insufficient because if we go back to financial services, then somebody from the bank would have to go visit the farm.
Mm-hmm.
If we go into procurement, then somebody would need the big, if it's a big contract, then somebody would go and visit the business.
Yeah.
And it's more often is they need to go on the other side of the planet to do something very basic. And now as technology evolves, it makes a lot more sense to move this into automated processes and have people focus more on the things that are can only be done by people. Can I trust Florin?
Yeah.
I know that they're not posing as a bigger company they are. I know they're not lying in any weird way,
Yeah.
but answer questions like, will the values be aligned? And just let technology and data do the obvious repetitive stuff.
And I guess then as you start to get more data, so you then expand beyond this is their address and this is what they do, and they are these are their certifications or whatever it may be. You can start getting a lot more granular into data around the company that you can then start. Whereas before you would have to understand, you'd have to know where to go to look to find a supplier, let's say. Now you can actually use these data sets with confidence that you can query them and find the information that you need coming to you, as opposed to you having to go and find it.
The simple version of what we do is if you were to have somebody spend 2 weeks on Google checking up a company, what would they write in a report? And we do that preemptively, automatically on 80 million businesses worldwide. And for example, and it's not as simple as something is true versus something is false.
Yeah.
A lot of it is in the nuances, like you subcontract the manufacturing process, and you can verify that that company has that machinery in place and have done that kind of projects in the past. What's not super obvious and requires a lot of research is, would this be something that is the one of the main focuses of the company, or is this one of 100 different capabilities? And your level of trust will be proportionate to that. And so we try to structure data in a way that we answer those questions preemptively, and you can put them in your system and focus on the human relationship.
Interesting. Now, what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about, because this is an area which I think is for procurement professionals. It's one of those that we've had this vision of, for example, supply discovery and getting this kind of information, and it's not necessarily been solved yet at scale. At least in solutions that we have seen as procurement professionals over the last 20 years. So it's really interesting of, how capabilities are developing in this area, so we have a lot more trust. I remember days of searching in databases for suppliers that did actuators. This is when I was in automotive, and you'd be given some random company in the Dominican Republic to add to an e-sourcing exercise just to show that you have some competition, but the incumbent always knew more about their market that they serve than you do. So you're always at this information disadvantage. What I was really interested to kind of build on that around is because you talked a little bit about how it requires technology like AI to be able to do this at scale across 80 million company records, for example. And so you've been on a journey to try to explore how can AI help us in procurement. So I'd love to kind of know how you have looked at AI and thought, like, where can this take us? What are some of the use cases that AI may be able to help us with from a procurement perspective?
Well, we started off with very simple questions, and then realized the full scope of what AI can do today. But we started off with very simple questions. We would take company information from existing vendors or existing databases. It would be it proved really easy for as human to realize that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And then we started off with very simple questions like, okay, maybe you only need to go to this company's website and look in the footer, and you'll realize that their address is not what this place says it is. And sometimes this place is a place that you'd really trust, like Google Maps, but it's just really challenging to get everything right. And then we extrapolated that to really understand a lot of things. You have to go where the company communicates, and then we had to build and understand the modern state of AI to figure out ways in which, for example, you have a LinkedIn page that nobody has touched in 20 months,
Yeah.
versus the website that was updated yesterday versus a news article that's 6 months old, and they all say contradicting stuff.
Yeah.
And then we started building AI on top of AI to say, um, we know what's really happening with this set of cases. Can you try to figure out a rule that applies, and to try to figure out these more difficult cases that where we would basically have to take one by one and say, no, this company used to do this. Since then, they used to do contract manufacturing. Since then, they've evolved, or they were bought, and now they build airplane wheels. And can you figure out a way, giving everything that we can find about a company, to say they're not a contract manufacturer anymore? And the reason why you need AI is because you never know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So to be able to protect yourself against that, and to only look at incumbents and say, okay, I already know the three companies. I'll give you a very clear example of a client. They already know all the companies. They have a factory that builds components very important for semiconductor companies. And they already know everybody they need to work with to be able to have full redundancy on their supply in their suppliers for everything. They never had a problem. But recently they needed to build a second factory outside China because of macro tensions.
Yep.
And it turns out it's not so easy to replicate all that knowledge that it took decades to gather, and say, can I build the exact same supply chain in a year in South Korea? And I, not being blindsided by what you already know, it's a huge and difficult task by itself. And the way to protect against that is to try to know everything, and not decide what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
And the technologist behind, or the technologist in me, wants to say, just let the AI decide what's important, give it an objective, say, I'm looking for suppliers that look like this, and try to know everything in advance so it finds the right ones.
And in how it does that, is that all about, and it's probably something that's come to the fore now with ChatGPT, but is it all about the prompt? Is it all about what you are asking the technology to do to drive the outputs that you want to see?
It resides in two places. You need to know a lot of things beforehand. In our case, we index about 300 million products manufactured by 4 million manufacturers around the world. And we basically go to their websites and find product information and capability information and different snippets associated to the factories, where they say, for example, we developed this kind of products in our own clean room. Here's how big it is. And you never know if you're gonna, or if your user, your client, will use that information, but it definitely doesn't hurt to have it.
Yeah.
And then from that, it's how you prompt it, but it's also how you work with what you get. So you might start by not thinking that you need, for example, this ISO certificate to be a condition, because you think, how many companies that can specialize in this kind of IT can there be in Florida?
Yeah.
And then when you realize that it's 100 times more than what you thought the number was, then you say, okay, now I can be picky. What else can I add?
Yeah, and start adding filters on top of it.
Right, and it starts being like a continuous interaction, like a dance, where you can also go the other way and say, I think South Korea has this capability a lot, and then you realize it's 10 companies, and you start being less restrictive.
So we've heard obviously a lot about AI in the last 6 months, 7 months or so, all since the launch of ChatGPT. I think everybody, us included, have talked and hypothesized about what that might mean and what it might not mean. As somebody who's followed this space for a long time, I'm really interested to know: has there been a fundamental kind of exponential change in the technology that is now driving this capability, or has it already existed and it's just that ChatGPT was the first thing to make this kind of accessible to the non AI expert like me, who can now go into a browser and type something and see in real time what AI can do?
It's both.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there was a shift in how people built AI, machine learning, and anything that's in between. In any way in which the computer finds a pattern and finds a way by itself, and you just teach it to find ways. There was a major shift enabled by Google at first to a technology called transformers. The premise behind transformers is really simple. It's a model that makes assumptions. At the most basic level, it's applied inside the sentence. And it says, I think this word will go well, but I also think these other 4 words will go well here.
Yeah.
And then it does this with itself. It knows what the sentence is, hides one word from it, and says, I think this would make sense here. And then it looks and says, oh, I was wrong. And that corrects the pattern it's finding at the most basic levels. And then you take it at the sentence level. And then if you find a way, what's happened recently, to turn everything into sentences. So if you look at an image, it's just a set of pixels colored differently. Those pixels you can translate into color codes, and then it looks more like a sentence.
Yeah.
So that's how we generate images today at a much larger scale, but it's pixel by pixel, what pixel makes sense here, and then it learns and it corrects itself. And this has been around for a while. We've been using transformers since the beginning of our company 4.5 years ago. The difference is that everybody learned how to translate everything into transformers, so images, sounds, soon videos. And instead of people working on 5 different AI/ML technologies with different patterns and ways of working behind them, now everybody's working on the same thing. So what's actually marginal improvement, it happens in 1,000 places at once, so it looks like a volcanic eruption.
Interesting.
That's on the argument on the marginal improvement. Now the second one is true as well, because what the OpenAI did, we all understood how transformer-based models, they build a hypothesis, look around them, try to find proof, and if they're wrong, they will correct the underlying assumption, better assumptions in the future. This is how we learn as well, right? Unless our ego gets in the way.
Yeah, the servers don't have an ego, which probably helps them.
Right. And what they proved and nobody thought was possible is, at some point, if you put enough compute and enough data in a model and you show it a simple equation, it will try to figure out all the possible answers. And if it needs, it will learn maths in order to solve that equation. And you can force a model, give it enough compute, give it enough data, just to find X, the value of X in an equation. It will learn maths, because that's the simplest way in which they can reliably find the answer. And that was considered to be impossible. And it turns out it can do things at a much greater scale than we all thought. So that becomes, and now what's happening is you put these two together, a lot of improvement on a lot of small things, the step function that OpenAI added, and we're gonna see the world change in the next 2 years. I'm an optimist. I think our lives will get a lot easier. I think we'll all have an assistant that has an assistant that has an assistant. We never have to exchange emails about what's your availability. No, what's your
Yeah.
availability. A lot of the simple, boring stuff will be solved. But on the other hand, I do understand why this is also scary. To an extent, it's scary to me as well, because we've never been through through such a big shift ever in the history of humanity, and that has to be at least a bit scary.
In so quickly, like how the art of the possible changed so quickly. I think is
Yeah,
the unknown related to that.
I think most of our jobs will become a lot easier or a lot more pleasant. Not necessarily easy, but a lot more pleasant. We'll stop doing a lot of things that annoy us.
Yeah.
But I think our personal lives will get complicated. It's really hard to read an article and to not know if it was actually written by a human.
No, that's for sure. You know, when you look at whether something is fake or real, and you know, up until now, it's been relatively easy to be able to pick between the two, and those lines are just going to get further and further blurred.
And that has to have some side effects. And the simple fact that we don't know which, I understand the skepticism as well.
How do you think about this from a product perspective? And the reason I ask from a product perspective, really what I'm thinking about is, okay, so what should we, not necessarily what should it expect in procurement, because I think that nobody knows, but we can hypothesize what some of the opportunities may be. And so, and you know, as a business owner, then you're obviously looking at that and thinking, okay, well, this is what the product impact may be. So I'd just love to know how you're thinking about, okay, so the world is changing. What does that mean? And how do I deal with that or take advantage of that?
Coming back to the beginning of our conversation, the data quality, how you measure it, how do you do simple stuff like put together two databases in two different systems. Those just became a lot easier, and they are hard and boring tasks in themselves. But the reason why organizations do them is because in that way you can enable a lot of use cases that are really hard to solve in other ways. I can give you a very simple example. A lot of professionals that we meet, they say they have this problem that they go in a 3 months procurement process to buy something that 2 years later they realize they already had a supplier that could do a better job at it. And that kind of a question, it's a simple question you can ask. A 10-year-old would understand the question, but being able to say, out of the 10,000 companies that are providing some chemicals to this company, and half of them I don't even understand what we're using them for, who can build this new product that we need, that's, you need to know a lot to be able to answer that. And it used to be that you could have access to resources that know a lot, like the database we're building and like other resources that other people are building. But even going through it and how you index it and how you search and how you make sure it's reliable and so on, it's a big enough process and a difficult one that it's a lot of the times it's not worth it. And what we should expect from the AI soon, in the next 6 to 12 months, is to solve all these problems that used to be huge.
Yeah.
So and a lot of processes will happen, will take from a lot of processes will become from a 10-week process to a 1 week process, where we'll keep the 10-20% where a lot of experience is needed. Can I trust Florin?
Yeah.
Can I does this company actually focus on what they're selling to me, or are they trying to learn with me? Are they testing something? So that those will be most of the effort, and that will probably happen for a long time. But it's also the fun part of the job, and it's where we feel good as people, because we get to put 20 years of experience into just reading one thing. And it's where value resides, not in searching databases or merging different technology platforms or googling for a resource. I think it's going to be fun. And I think the way to take advantage of it is at first to play around with it a lot.
Yeah.
In whatever form, even for us, really close to everything AI, everything transformer, everything technology. A lot of the things that the newer technology does were really surprising to us at first. They're really counterintuitive. We all predicted that we're going to automate the simple jobs, and we ended up with AI that can write code. You can look up any report from 2 years ago. Nobody expected that we would write code with AI. And I think the way to get an intuition about it is just to play around with it a lot. Try to use it, even in places where you already know an easier way, but just get accustomed to it. Think of it as it's 1985, and this new thing called the personal computer comes up. You might have a better way to calculate something, but try it out on the computer because it's going to get a lot better, a lot faster. And for you, you'll figure out ways in which you can 10x your efficiency in places maybe that you don't like.
I think that's great advice, because I think my experience so far has been, I've experimented. What's been really interesting to me, and this is, I think, probably just the beginning, is it makes information and data become more accessible. Because in the way that I've kind of experimented, and this is on the sales, the marketing side, which is just really the flip side of procurement, but a lot of the same data, company information and all that good stuff, where you have this huge data lake, but you've got to understand, well, there's two things. One is data quality, as we've talked about, but second is you've got to understand how to query that data for it to be relevant and for it to be useful. You don't now need to know how to build all these complex reports to try and tell you the exact things you need, because you can just type and ask a question. And then the AI is then delivering what you asked for and making that more accessible. Now, in the experimentation to start with, you may say, well, and this is what I found, well, the data quality still isn't there. That's not been fixed yet to a degree where I can rely 100% on it. But by doing that experimentation, you start to imagine, wow, what could be possible? Once I have more confidence in that information. And that's how you start thinking about all the different use cases. I don't think until you play with it, it's hard to conceptualize what it can do for us.
That's an amazing point, and it's actually one of the things that get me most excited. With leaps in technology, the playing field gets much more even. Because maybe you work in a company where you don't have a tech team assigned to your department. And even though your job is important, or maybe your department makes the company work, tech talent is really hard to find. And there's always a competition for the right tech resources. Yeah. And now I think you'll be very surprised to see how many things you can do by yourself or with one person and not 20. And it's always why it's exciting that technology leaps bring shifts in all sorts of different markets, because now you will be able to see like companies with 100 people become more efficient than departments of 1,000 people. Yeah. And it's about figuring out how to use the tools to your advantage. And it's something that I really love seeing in markets. It makes things interesting, and it gives the right edge to the right people.
Yeah, and the faster you figure that out, it truly does become a competitive advantage, because you kind of get that first mover, the benefits of being the first to be able to do that.
100%. And for us, for all our tools needed to be in the hands of a tech team, which restricted the type of clients we're allowed or we can work with a lot. And now we've just put GPT on top. You can interact with the database. You don't need to be a technical person. And I think changes like this will happen a lot.
Well, Florin, I know it's about time for us to wrap up, but I'm actually, first of all, really excited to continue the conversation. We're going to go a bit deeper at AOP Direct. So if anyone is listening to this and is interested in hearing us talk a little bit more and specifically around supplier firmographics and supplier discovery, then please do check that out. It's on June the 13th. And you can just go to artofprocurement.com/AOP Direct to find out more information. Also, it's a question we always ask, and it's always the easy question I say, Florin, at the end, is if anyone who's listened to the conversation is really interested to get to know you, find out where you are, connect directly, learn a little bit more about what you do, then where would be the easiest and best places for them to find you?
Veridion.com or my personal LinkedIn, Florin Tufan, or the Veridion page on LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect. Well, what I'll do is I always do, we'll link up to those and the AOP Direct event on the show notes of the episode for today's podcast. That's going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. And until we speak again in a couple of weeks' time, Florin, thank you very much for joining me. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.